On March 3rd, 2019, investigative journalist Elena Vargas published what would become her final story. The exposé detailed a human trafficking network operating across state lines, hidden behind legitimate businesses and protected by corrupt officials. Within 72 hours, Elena's phone went silent. Her apartment showed signs of a hurried departure. Her editor received a cryptic message that didn't sound like her. And then nothing. What began as the breakthrough of her career became the mystery of her disappearance. This is the story of a reporter who got too close to the truth and the investigation that continues to haunt those she left behind. Chapter 1. The investigation begins. Elena Vargas had spent 12 years building a reputation as a relentless investigative journalist. At 34, she worked for a mid-sized regional newspaper in Phoenix, Arizona, but her ambitions stretched far beyond local politics and city council corruption. She specialized in stories others avoided, stories that required patience, discretion, and a willingness to face danger. Her interest in human trafficking began almost by accident. In late 2017, she was covering a series of labor violations at construction sites across the Phoenix metro area. Workers had complained about withheld wages, threats, and unsafe conditions. But as Elena dug deeper, interviewing workers who spoke only in whispers and met her in parking lots after dark, a more disturbing picture emerged. Several workers described situations that went beyond labor exploitation. They spoke of recruiters who promised legitimate jobs, only to confiscate documents upon arrival. They mentioned women who worked in the background of certain businesses, rarely seen during daylight, always accompanied by handlers. They referenced transportation networks that moved people between cities under conditions that sounded more like captivity than employment. Elena recognized the patterns immediately. This wasn't just labor abuse. It was trafficking. Over the next 18 months, she devoted herself to understanding the network. She cultivated sources slowly, knowing that trust took time in communities already traumatized by exploitation. She met with survivors who had escaped, listening to their stories in safe houses and advocacy centers. Each interview was conducted with extreme care, often requiring multiple meetings before survivors felt comfortable sharing details. Elena learned to read body language, to recognize when questions went too far, and to give people the space they needed to share their trauma on their own terms. She cross-referenced business registrations, looking for shell companies and repeated ownership patterns. She tracked transportation routes, noting which trucking companies appeared again and again in survivor accounts. Late nights were spent poring over public records, connecting dots between seemingly unrelated businesses that shared ownership structures or financial backing. What emerged was a sophisticated operation. The network recruited victims primarily from Central America and Southeast Asia, using promises of restaurant work, housekeeping positions, and construction jobs. Upon arrival, victims found themselves trapped, documents seized, debts fabricated, movement restricted. They were shuffled between locations: massage parlors, agricultural sites, private homes, and small manufacturing facilities. The operation was fluid, constantly moving to avoid detection, yet structured enough to process dozens of victims simultaneously. But the most disturbing discovery was the protection the network enjoyed. Elena's sources hinted at relationships with local officials, police officers who looked the other way, and inspectors who scheduled visits far enough in advance for operations to temporarily shut down or relocate workers. Payments changed hands. Warnings were issued before raids. Evidence mysteriously disappeared from the evidence rooms. Elena kept detailed notes, stored in encrypted files, and backed up in multiple locations. She understood the risk of what she was uncovering. Friends noticed she became more cautious, checking over her shoulder, varying her routes home, and avoiding patterns in her daily routine. She stopped posting on social media. She began using burner phones for sensitive communications. She told close friends that if anything happened to her, they should know she hadn't been careless. By early 2019, she had gathered enough evidence to move forward. Bank records showing suspicious transfers, survivor testimonies documenting specific locations and individuals, photographs of properties connected to the network, and most critically, she had identified key players, the organizers, the recruiters, and the enforcers who kept victims compliant through threats and violence. Elena's editor, Marcus Chun, was both impressed and concerned. The story was solid, meticulously researched, and potentially explosive, but it was also dangerous. He pushed Elena to involve law enforcement before publication to ensure protections were in place. Elena agreed, reaching out to federal investigators who had been monitoring similar networks. What she didn't know was that her inquiries had already been noticed. The same network she was investigating had systems in place to detect exactly this kind of attention. Survivors later testified that word had spread through the organization months before publication. A journalist was asking questions, and she was getting too close. By the time Elena finalized her article in February 2019, the network already knew her name. Chapter 2. The Breakthrough. Elena's article, titled Hidden in Plain Sight, The Trafficking Network Operating in Arizona's Shadows, was scheduled for publication on March 3, 2019. In the weeks leading up to release, she worked around the clock to finalize details, verify sources, and coordinate with her editor. The piece was comprehensive, running over 5,000 words with accompanying photographs and documents. It opened with the story of Maria, a survivor from Guatemala who had been promised restaurant work in Phoenix, but instead found herself locked in a house with 6 other women, forced to work in massage parlors under constant surveillance. Elena traced Maria's journey from recruitment to escape, using her story as a framework to expose the broader network. The article is named Businesses Operating as Fronts. It detailed how victims were transported across state lines using commercial trucking routes, hidden in compartments designed for cargo. It identified properties where workers had been held, complete with addresses and property records showing ownership chains. And perhaps most damaging, it documented financial connections between trafficking operations and individuals with ties to local government, including campaign contributions and shared business ventures. Elena's reporting revealed the full scope of the operation. The network generated millions annually, cycling victims through various forms of exploitation before discarding them or moving them to other locations. She documented the psychological manipulation used to keep victims compliant, threats against family members back home, fabricated debts that grew with each passing day, and constant surveillance that made escape seem impossible. Elena had anticipated pushback. She knew the network would deny everything, that lawyers would threaten lawsuits, and that her sources might face retaliation. What she didn't anticipate was how quickly things would escalate. In the 48 hours before publication, Elena received her first direct warning. An anonymous message arrived at her work email, simple and chilling. Drop the story. You don't understand what you're exposing. She forwarded it to her editor and to law enforcement contacts, but she did not stop. On the morning of March 1st, 2 days before publication, Elena noticed someone following her. A dark sedan appeared behind her during her morning commute, stayed 3 cars back, and pulled away only when she turned into the newspaper's parking garage. She documented the license plate and reported it to the police. Officers checked the registration. It came back to a rental company. The renter's information led to a dead end, a fake name and a prepaid credit card. Despite the mounting tension, Elena moved forward. She believed in the story, believed in giving voice to the victims who had trusted her with their experiences. On March 2nd, she sent final edits to Marcus, confirming everything was ready for the next morning's release. That evening, she met with 2 of her key sources for a final check-in. They met at a diner on the outskirts of Phoenix, a public location Elena considered safe. The sources, both former trafficking victims turned advocates, expressed concern about their own safety post-publication. Elena assured them that their identities were protected, that only first names and vague location details appeared in the article. Surveillance footage from the diner later showed the 3 of them seated in a corner booth, speaking in low tones, Elena taking occasional notes. At one point, Elena appeared to look up sharply, as if noticing someone. but she returned to the conversation, and the meeting concluded around 9 p.m. Elena left alone, driving her white Honda Civic back toward her apartment in Central Phoenix. Traffic cameras captured her vehicle heading eastbound on McDowell Road at 9:47 p.m. She stopped at a red light near 16th Street, and the footage showed her checking her phone. That was the last confirmed sighting of Elena before her article went live. On March 3rd at 6 a.m., Hidden in Plain Sight was published online and in print. The response was immediate. Other news outlets picked up the story. Advocacy organizations shared it across social media. Law enforcement agencies confirmed they were reviewing the information. Within hours, it became one of the most read pieces the newspaper had published in years. But Elena wasn't there to see it. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her apartment was empty, and her editor, expecting her triumphant arrival at the office that morning, instead found himself filing a missing persons report by noon. Chapter 3: The Disappearance. When Elena Vargas failed to appear at work on March 3rd, her editor, Marcus Shea, initially assumed she was taking a personal day. The stress of the investigation had been enormous, and the article's publication marked the end of 18 months of intensive work. It would have been understandable for her to take time to decompress. But when her phone went straight to voicemail repeatedly, and when she didn't respond to emails or text messages, concern grew. By mid-morning, Marcus drove to Elena's apartment, a modest one-bedroom unit in a complex near downtown Phoenix. What he found was unsettling. Elena's car was in its assigned parking spot. Her apartment door was locked, but building management provided access. Inside, everything appeared normal at first glance. Furniture in place, no signs of struggle, kitchen clean. But subtle details told a different story. Elena's laptop was gone. Her work bag, which she carried everywhere, was missing. Her phone charger lay on the kitchen counter, but her phone was nowhere to be found. Most telling, her overnight bag, usually stored in her closet, was gone, along with a few changes of clothes. Her toothbrush was missing from the bathroom, and a jacket she typically wore was absent from its usual hook by the door. It looked like Elena had packed for a quick trip, but she had told no one she was leaving. Marcus immediately contacted the police. Given the timing, Elena's disappearance coinciding exactly with her explosive article's publication, investigators treated it as a high-priority case from start. Federal agencies were notified due to the trafficking connections. Detectives canvassed Elena's building. Neighbors reported nothing unusual. No one had heard disturbances. No one had seen Elena return home the previous night, though her car suggested she had. Security cameras in the building's garage were non-functional, a detail that would later seem suspicious. Maintenance records showed the cameras had been reported broken 2 weeks earlier, but repairs had been delayed. Investigators pulled traffic camera footage, retracing Elena's route from the diner. She had driven home, taking her usual path. Cameras showed her car entering her apartment complex's parking lot at 10:14 p.m. on March 2nd. But there was no footage of her exiting. What happened between 10:14 p.m. and the morning remained unclear. On March 4th, Elena's editor received an email from her account. The message was brief: "Need to step away for a few days. Personal emergency. We'll explain soon." It was sent at 3:47 a.m. on March 4th, hours after she was last seen. Marcus immediately flagged it as suspicious. The phrasing didn't match Elena's writing style. She never used vague terms like personal emergency without elaborating. And most critically, she would never disappear without warning on the day her biggest story was published. Elena had been planning a follow-up piece, had scheduled interviews for later that week, and had expressed excitement about finally seeing her investigation reach the public. Digital forensics traced the email's IP address to a public Wi-Fi network at a truck stop outside Tucson, over 100 miles from Phoenix. Security footage from the truck stop showed multiple vehicles coming and going during the relevant time window, but Elena was not visible in any of the footage. Investigators noted several large commercial trucks, rental vans, and vehicles with obscured license plates passing through during those hours. Investigators considered multiple scenarios. Had Elena left voluntarily? Perhaps fleeing threats she hadn't disclosed? Had she been abducted, with the email sent by someone else to buy time? Or was she in hiding, protecting herself from retaliation? Her family, parents living in Colorado, a younger brother in California, was contacted. They hadn't heard from her. They described her as dedicated and brave, but also practical. Elena wouldn't just vanish, her mother told investigators. She'd fight. She'd call someone. She'd leave a trail. But the trail had gone cold. Phone records showed Elena's phone going offline at 11:52 p.m. on March 2nd. Her last call had been to one of her sources at 10:31 p.m., a brief conversation lasting 90 seconds. Her last text was to Marcus at 10:45 p.m. Home safe. Tomorrow's the day. By March 7th, Elena had been missing for 4 days. Her article continued to generate attention, with law enforcement announcing investigations into the businesses and individuals she had named. But Elena herself had gone. The question haunted everyone who knew her. Had she uncovered something so dangerous that she had to disappear? Or had the network she exposed taken her to ensure she couldn't testify, couldn't follow up, couldn't dig any deeper? Chapter 4. The Investigation and Aftermath. The investigation into Elena Vargas's disappearance became one of the most intensive missing persons cases in Arizona's recent history. Federal agencies joined local law enforcement, combining resources to trace every lead, interview every contact, and analyze every piece of evidence. Investigators started with the trafficking network Elena had exposed. Raids were conducted on multiple properties named in her article. Several businesses were shut down, and dozens of potential victims were identified and offered services. But the raids yielded no direct evidence of Elena's whereabouts. Interviews with network members proved frustrating. Most denied knowing who Elena was. Those who admitted familiarity with her article claimed they learned about it only after publication. No one confessed to involvement in her disappearance, and no physical evidence linked any individual to the crime. Defense attorneys argued that correlation was not causation, that Elena's disappearance could have been unrelated to her reporting despite the suspicious timing. The truck stop email remained a critical piece of evidence. Investigators theorized that if Elena had been abducted, her captors might have used her laptop to send the message, attempting to delay the investigation. The location, a truck stop on a major interstate, suggested possible transportation routes leading out of state or even across international borders. Forensic analysis of her laptop, once recovered from her apartment, showed no signs that it had been used to send that email, confirming it had been taken and used elsewhere. Tracking data from Elena's phone, pulled from cell tower records, showed her device traveling south on Interstate 10 after going offline near her apartment. The last ping came from a tower near the Arizona-Mexico border around 2:30 a.m. on March 3rd. After that, nothing. The phone was either destroyed or powered down completely. This detail fueled the most disturbing theory, that Elena had been taken into Mexico beyond the immediate reach of U.S. law enforcement. Trafficking networks often use cross-border movement to complicate investigations, knowing that jurisdictional issues could slow or halt pursuits. Mexican authorities were contacted and cross-border cooperation began. But without specific leads about where Elena might have been taken, the search area was impossibly vast. Investigators faced language barriers, jurisdictional complications, and the challenge of tracking someone in a country where trafficking networks operated with alarming frequency and sophistication. Months passed. Tips came in regularly. Reported sightings in different cities, claims from individuals who believed they'd seen Elena. Each was investigated. None were verified. Some tips came from well-meaning citizens who genuinely thought they recognized her. Others came from opportunists hoping for reward money. A few came from sources investigators suspected were deliberately designed to mislead and waste resources. Elena's family launched public campaigns, holding press conferences and working with advocacy groups to keep her case visible. Her face appeared on missing persons databases, billboards, and social media. The hashtag #FindElenaVargas trended multiple times, driven by journalists and activists who saw her disappearance as an attack on press freedom. Fellow reporters held vigils, organized fundraisers for the investigation, and continued her work by following up on leads she had documented. But as the first anniversary of her disappearance approached, the case remained unsolved. Elena's apartment stayed empty, her belongings untouched, preserved as potential evidence. Her article continued to be cited in trafficking awareness campaigns, its impact lasting even as its author remained missing. Three theories dominated discussions among investigators, journalists, and the public. The first theory: Elena was abducted and killed shortly after publication, her body disposed of to prevent her from testifying or continuing her investigation. This theory was supported by the network's known ruthlessness and by the complete absence of any credible sightings since her disappearance. Traffickers had eliminated threats before, and Elena represented a significant danger to their operations. The second theory: Elena was taken alive and trafficked herself, either held within a network or sold to prevent exposure. Some advocates pointed to cases where journalists investigating trafficking had been subjected to the very crimes they were documenting, used as warnings to others. This theory suggested Elena might still be alive somewhere, held against her will, unable to communicate. The third theory: Elena had gone into hiding voluntarily, either because of threats she hadn't disclosed or because she possessed additional evidence she was protecting. Supporters of this theory noted the packed bag and the possibility that Elena had an escape plan that investigators weren't aware of. Perhaps she had uncovered something even more dangerous than what appeared in her published article. Each theory had proponents. None could be proven. In 2021, a development briefly reignited hope. A woman matching Elena's description was reportedly seen in a shelter in Hermosillo, Mexico, approximately 200 miles south of the Arizona border. Mexican authorities investigated, but the woman turned out to be a trafficking survivor from Central America. She was not Elena. As of today, Elena Vargas remains missing. Her case is still open. Law enforcement continues to follow leads, though they've become increasingly rare. Her family continues to search, refusing to accept that she's gone. They maintain a website dedicated to her case, updating it with new information and keeping public attention focused on finding answers. The network Elena exposed has been significantly disrupted. Federal prosecutions resulted in multiple convictions. Dozens of victims were identified and connected with services. Several businesses were permanently shut down. Her article accomplished what she intended. It brought hidden exploitation into the light and prompted action. But the cost was devastating. Elena gave everything to tell that story, and somewhere in the aftermath of its publication, she vanished. Was she silenced by the network she exposed? Is she alive somewhere, unable to make contact? Or did her investigation uncover something even more dangerous than what appeared in her article? The answers remain unknown. Elena's disappearance stands as both a testament to the courage of investigative journalism and a stark reminder of its risks. For those who knew her, who worked alongside her, and who benefited from her reporting, the question persists: what happened to Elena Vargas? And will the truth ever be found? Elena Vargas's story reminds us of the dangers faced by journalists who expose powerful criminal networks. If you found this investigation important, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more true crime documentaries. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to light.